reading. I'm Meg Carney, the founding director of the Solstice MFA in Creative Writing program here at LaSalle University. Welcome to the first in the series of 7 readings taking place as part of our spring 2024 semester. This is the start of our semester with this 10-day residency on campus. As we open this physical and virtual space, I would like to note that we acknowledge that the territory on which LaSalle University stands is that of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts people. LaSalle's campus is a place to honor and respect the history and continued efforts of the Native and Indigenous community leaders who make up Eastern Massachusetts and the surrounding region. This statement is one small step in acknowledging the history that brought us to reside on this land and to help us seek understanding of our place within that history. Ownership of land is itself a colonial concept. Many tribes had seasonal relationships with the land we currently inhabit. Today, Newton and Auburndale are still home to Indigenous people, including the Nipmuc Nation and the Massachusetts peoples. For more information, please visit the Massachusetts Center for Native American Awareness and the Commission on Indian Affairs of the State of Massachusetts. And now for tonight's reading. First up, we will have our fabulous graduate assistant and alum, Ellen Austin Lee, who will be introduced by Assistant Director and alum Quentin Collins. Then we will have fiction faculty member Venise Berry, who will be introduced by comics and graphic narrative student Corey Knight. Then we're going to have a very, very brief break to set up a little bit of technology, very brief. And then Cassie Rubico, another alum and graduate assistant creative nonfiction writer, will get up and introduce Josh Neufeld, the guy with the tech. And he will read last. So, Hugh, come on up. Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Hello. I'm Quentin Collins, Assistant Director and alum of the Solstice Low Residency MFA in Creative Writing program. Many of you who are familiar with the work that Meg and I do on a regular basis have compared the task of running a residency to a duck swimming. Calm on the surface, thrashing feet beneath the water. Or to use another cliche, the tip of the iceberg pales in comparison to what lies below. Solstice alum and grad assistant Ellen Austin Lee has seen what's behind the curtain, or to use another cliche, she knows how the sausage is made. Despite this, Ellen excitedly offered to return after serving as grad assistant last winter. Moreover, since then, she has never hesitated to offer her time and her talents to help Solstice, a testament to her roles as a brilliant writer and literary community member. When it comes to Ellen's poems, there's nothing cliche in the writing. Her work exudes an empathy that reaches out to readers and recognizes the depths of what makes us human. As an example of this, consider her poem On a Visit to St. Mary's Cemetery, which appears in Shot Glass Journal. The walk up to Cemetery Hill looks like it did 5 decades ago, though with more tombstones and fuller trees. I stand breathless in front of my father's grave, bend to brush gathered dirt from the dates. I have not stayed with anything long enough to make my name like you, I sigh. A chill wind lifts my hair, raises the skin on my arms. A red-tailed hawk circles below clouds that race overhead. A sunbeam appears and warms my face uplifted. And I can't see I'm finally standing still. And can't I see I'm finally standing still? In addition to this poem, Ellen's work has appeared in numerous places like Mask and Spectacle, The Main Review, and Gyroscope Review, to name many, many, many more. She is also the author of 2 chapbooks published by Finishing Line Press, Firefly, and Lockdown: Scenes from Early in the Pandemic. When Ellen isn't racking up more publications than I can count, or chomping at the bit to assist us in one way or another, she also brings literary citizenship to the table by uplifting the poetry of fellow writers as co-host of the Poetry Night at Sitwell's reading series. Please join me in welcoming a legend in our own time, Ellen Austin Lee.
Hi, I'm Ellen Austin Lee. And can you hear me okay? Great. And I think the legend is in my own mind. Isn't that the cliche? But I'm as you just heard, Ellen Austin Lee, and I'm a Solstice alum in poetry. And I am here tonight to read some poems that I've published over the past year. So I'm going to start with a poem called Somewhere Beyond Our Solar System. Somewhere beyond our solar system, the Voyager's golden record floats. Has some advanced being listened to the murmurs of Earth, Sagan's choices, a baby's cry, the plaintive wail, the mariachi band, Mozart, Bach, Johnny B. Good, in blind Willie Johnson's Dark Was the Night to represent human sadness. Can this be fathomed? Will another civilization dismiss us like we dismiss lower orders on Earth? I stumbled upon some trucker's account of V-shaped lights hovering over the desert, the fast lateral shifts and vanishing alien movements. He stopped watch. Most of us will brush him off because he wears flannel instead of tweed, though he says no way he's the sort of person to imagine this. I know what I saw, he said. This sighting made him an extraterrestrial believer. We possess no ability to assess consciousness outside of our own. Take the creatures on our planet. Our 15-year-old cichlid took a week to die. An orange body suspended sideways in the tank, the younger blue companion swimming sentry by the side. When it went nose down, I scooped it out and buried it in the garden bed. After the orange one passed, the blue refused food and for a day hid behind the fake seagrass. Listen, I know what I saw. This next poem is called River of Clouds. River of Clouds. I snap a panoramic on chimney top rock, turbulent air and my hair wet with sweat, my skin wearing Kentucky weather like it had been steam ironed on this morning. The sun shone as we rose and left our cabin on our first trip alone since our sons moved from home. We emerged from the trail as the rain came like soft kisses at 1,000 feet up. The trees obscure the red river that cuts through the sandstone gorge below. Cool drops meet the unseen water. Fog rises in thick ribbons where the river lives. This river of clouds shows what lies hidden from view. Look, I capture a figure from behind, his gray hooded poncho leaning against the cliff edge rail. I can see my love. Look, from here, I can see him and the river rising. This next poem is an homage to my in-laws who ran a Chinese restaurant in downtown Cincinnati for forever. And Jose and Quentin know this poem because they kindly published it for me. But during the pandemic, they weren't able to reopen the restaurant after the pandemic. So this is for them. The Ghost of the Yum Yum. My father-in-law's hand-painted sign, locked inside, says, "Eat as if you are in China." Color photos of 1980s patrons line the walls, turn sepia. The Yum Yum on Ray Street, a threshold in time. Say, "Eat as if you are in China," and my husband and his brother did. They lived in the Yum Yum on Ray Street, a threshold in time. Red tablecloths and Chinese zodiac placemats, chopsticks to live. And my husband and his brother did dream under the Chinese lanterns. Ghosts, Christmas lights, red tablecloths and Chinese zodiac placemats, chopsticks, and their mother, Shen Mei, stir-frying, and their father, Tom, wiry, dreaming ghosts under the Chinese lanterns. Christmas lights year-round, and the tabletop Christmas tree with a dirty-faced angel, and their mother, Shen Mei, stir-frying, and their father, Tom, wiry, waiting tables, the most gracious host. Head down, gentle. The tabletop Christmas tree year-round with a dirty-faced angel. Color photos of 1980s patrons lining the wall, turning sepia. He waited tables, head down. The most gracious host. Gentle, my father-in-law. His hand-painted sign locked inside. It was a great restaurant too. The next two poems I'm going to read just recently came out in Still the Journal. And it's funny, when I was putting these poems together, I noticed there's all this water in these poems. So this one is kind of braids together an encounter I had with a seahorse on a scuba diving trip. They're like one of my favorite sea creatures, and also the hippocampus, and that's a center in the brain well, you'll hear in the poem what happens in the hippocampus, but it got its name partly because it's shaped like a seahorse. So the Greek hippocampus is horse monster. So that's the way my brain works anyway. So that the two things came together. Consider the seahorse, tail tethered to seaweed, anchored on the harbor floor. Consider this fish alone, missing its other more, the link in a pair. Consider a horse tremoring in the field, how your friend once said, you were like this too, barely held, quavering in waves. Consider this sea monster, diminutive yet holding fast, open eyes surveying you, a foal entwined in grass. Ponder the hippocampus embedded deep within the brain, how it swims in the temporal lobe. Consider the construct of time, how it is memory defined, even as it moves forward into fathoms unknown. Consider the synapse between senses and past, how the smell of salt takes you to a familiar beach somewhere. The hippocampus reigns this in our minds. Ponder the delicate seahorse spent when seas get rough. Its tiny middle fin gives out and they're swept up. Consider damage to the seahorse, the limbic border between two worlds. As my hand fans flat against the sand, I study the currents unfurl. Thank you. And my last two poems are, I've been doing a lot of exploration of ancestral trauma. And my ancestors left Ireland during the Irish potato famine, obviously very traumatic. And because of that, there's very little that's been passed along in our family. So I've just been writing a lot of poems about kind of imaginings. This is called Great Great Grandmother, a fiction. And the epigraph is from Quarantine by Ethan Boland. in the worst hour of the worst season of the worst year of a whole people. To survive was a stone swallowed and grown until hers was the granite sown throughout the countryside, hard, silent, cold. Her head, vertigo of hunger, her womb, the warm core that carried her to shore. The ship strapped heavy with her empty. What family she left behind, some buried, some too hollow for that mercy. Mercy, her face turned to the sea spray, the wind she fights across the way, woman on the Atlantic. I wish I could say brave before she went over the rail. At night, I see her floating until she lands. The seafloor is where she must be. When I wake, the sand waits me. And my last poem is very short, and it's in a Welsh form that's called a cloggernock. Very short, tight, a lot of rhyming. And again, Ethan Boland, Irish poet with the epigraph. And the other part of the title is another Welsh word, Haraeth, and it means a longing for home, but that you've never been to. So it doesn't really translate in English, but. So the epigraph is what they survived. We could not even live. And I should say before I read this that this on my only trip to Ireland so far, we visited some ancient sites, and one was a ring fort, and this is where this takes place. So it's a fort, walls made out of stone. So the hunger circles and echo. Ring forts, I have wandered. I know. The rain birthing green, this island between standing stones, the ghost home. Thank you for listening.
Sorry, still in traffic. There we go. Do you know that if you Google Venise berry, as a side note, you also get gardening tips? So if you need to know the care and keeping of Venise berry, I encourage you to seek out Google. On to new business. Venise Berry's resume as a writer is nothing short of amazing. She's not only an accomplished and much lauded fiction writer with multiple publications and awards, including the Creative Contribution to Literature Award from the Zora Neale Hurston Society, the Honor Book Award from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, and if librarians are saying it's good, you know it's good, and an Iowa Author Award from the Public Library Foundation in Des Moines. She is also a talented and innovative researcher, contributing to scholarship in African American cultural criticism and media, youth, and pop culture, and writing in nonfiction spheres as well, with a heavy emphasis on film, including 2005's Historical Dictionary of African American Film. As if that wasn't enough, she also teaches here at Solstice and at the University of Iowa. What drew me to working with Venise was her sense of humor. The first time I heard her read, I was blown away by that just sharp, incisive wit. There's so many levels operating in this humor. Not only is her work sharp, drawing the listener and the reader in, her mentorship is much the same way, with very specific critiques that make you step back and go, I hadn't thought of that. So she gets you thinking and leaves you with no questions except all the questions. Her just an eye for detail and direct approach that really encourages you to look deeper. So folks, I give you the multi-talented, multifaceted Venise Berry.
Okay, I'm going to read from the current novel that I'm working on. It's not as polished as some of my other stuff, but it's something I'm interested in. I've been dealing with mental health issues for the last year in my writing, and so this will kind of give you an idea of some of the stuff I'm dealing with. And it's based, I keep telling my daughter, I said, well, it's going to be fiction, but don't be surprised if you see some of us in the book. I'm trying to get her prepared. But the novel is called Samsara, and it's a Buddhist term, the metaphysical cycle of, should I step over here? Okay, thank you. It involves the metaphysical cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. So it's called Samsara, and it's based on a mother and a daughter who are living together and both of them are dealing with mental health issues and certain kinds of strange situations. This is chapter 1, I think. Maybe not. But anyway, I'm so sick of this shit. I don't understand why people won't stop moving my things, Nakia screamed. Luann's eyes shot open. Mom, why can't you leave my shit alone? Nakia stood shaking in the doorway, her 5'5" frame blocking out the light from the kitchen. After taking several deep breaths to collect her thoughts, Luann responded, "What are you looking for, Nakia?" "The scrunchies for my hair." "They were sitting on the kitchen counter all week and now they're gone." "Did you check your basket in the closet?" Nakia turned around and stomped across the house into the bathroom. She slid open the closet door and snatched up the package of scrunchies on top of her basket. "Please leave my stuff alone, Mother." Luann squeezed her eyes shut tightly. She truly loved her child, but some days and nights were better than others. Nakia had been diagnosed with severe anxiety and depression, and she spent a lot of time being unhappy. So Luann was trying to do everything she could to help. "It's the middle of the night, and you don't know how irritating it is to have to look for my stuff after you've moved it," Nakia continued. Luann held her tongue as long as she could. "Nakia, did your scrunchies belong on the kitchen counter?" she asked. Nakia huffed. "I was going to move them myself, but you didn't give me a chance." "They sat on the cabinet for almost a week." "So sorry, Mom. Everybody can't be as perfect as you are." "Nobody is perfect, Nakia. I just want you to take responsibility for your part in the problem. You always do that. You try to gaslight me saying I'm the problem." "Nakia, I'm not gaslighting you. When you move my scrunchies and then tell me I'm supposed to take the blame because they were on the kitchen cabinet, that's exactly what you're doing, gaslighting me. I'm trying to get you to see that you should not have left them on the kitchen counter for a week. We both need to take some responsibility." Nakia stormed into her bedroom and yelled, "You never listen to me. Everything is always about you." Luann opened her mouth. She wanted to respond, but decided against it. She hated the drama. But unfortunately, Nakia's father was a drama king, and she had birthed a drama queen. Nakia complained about a lot of things, anything. It had become almost a daily occurrence. Something was always wrong. Sometimes Luann found herself tiptoeing around her own child in her own house, just trying to avoid a fight. Luann glanced at the clock. It was 3:43 a.m. She laid her head down, hoping to claim the next 4 hours until she had to get to her first meeting at 10. She was thrilled when she first discovered that she was pregnant. She had spent her early years securing an education and building a successful career, so having a child was the last thing on her list. As a matter of fact, her doctor called it a geriatric pregnancy because she was 39 years old. She remembered how insulting that term was. Her baby's daddy, Dion, was a good guy, but he was not around a lot. He worked as an entertainer on a cruise ship, so he was constantly moving and couldn't invest in Nakia's life as much as he wanted to. Luann met him on a Caribbean cruise. Stops included Key West, Cozumel, and Belize City. Beautiful white sand, deep blue skies, and calm blue-green seas added to Dion's sexy voice, making the trip magical. His big smile was surrounded by a salt and pepper beard, and his light brown eyes plowed deep into her heart. Dion performed twice a day for 6 days. His repertoire included 1970s and 80s crooners like Luther Vandross, Barry White, Teddy Pendergrass, and Marvin Gaye. Luann didn't plan to ever see him again after that trip, so she decided to enjoy all that he had to offer. A couple of months later, when the pregnancy test came back positive, she wanted to keep the baby, so she knew she had to tell him. As an entertainer with the cruise line, a lot of different women approached Dion, but he was not the player that most assumed him to be. When he did accept the invitation of a lady, she had to be special, and Luann was. He usually used protection, and he and Luann were cautious at first. When Luann told Dion she didn't know what to expect, he was quiet for a couple of minutes. Then he asked, what did she want to do? 20 years later, Luann was thankful that he always sent his child support payments on time. He often visited Nakia between cruises 3 or 4 times a year, and he called his daughter twice a week. The connection also had an added bonus because Luann and Dion had actually become good friends with benefits. She and Nakia took a cruise at least once a year that Dion arranged, and he stayed at the house during his visits. Nakia was diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety disorder in junior high school. She agreed to therapy not because she wanted to and thought it would help, but because she wanted to shut up her mother. Every time Luann brought up her sadness, Nakia wanted to scream, please leave me alone. And sometimes she did. Life was difficult enough without her mother all up in her business. Nakia worried about everything. A lot of it was focused on her own future, but she also worried about her friends. She worried about people who were being bullied and mistreated. She worried about climate change. She worried about how ugly the world had become, the wars in Ukraine and Israel, sex trafficking around the world, devastating floods and fires and earthquakes and hurricanes, and the COVID pandemic too. Her worry was 24/7. Whatever you focus on will influence how you feel, Nakia's therapist had explained. Nakia shrugged. It's usually the other way around. How I feel influences what I focus on. Can you give me an example? The therapist asked. I don't know. Sometimes I just want people to leave me alone. Let me feel how I feel. But I want you to understand that a negative attitude makes you pay attention to the negative around you, and your perspective is then pushed in that direction. With a more positive attitude, you'll be pulled toward good stuff, and that can help you feel better. There's so much ugly in the world, and how can anybody ignore it? You can't fix the world, Nakia. You can only fix the things you have control of. Nakia rolled her eyes and groaned. Let's say it's raining outside and you think, what a miserable day. If you follow that thought, it's absolutely a miserable day. It's going to be a miserable day. But if you think something positive instead, like the rain is necessary for grass and trees and flowers to grow, then it gives the rain a more positive meaning. Yeah, but it's still a miserable day. Nakia. Okay, think about how you might make it a better day. What about drinking a hot chocolate and with whipped cream? Or, some people sleep better on rainy days. Nakia looked out the window at the rain falling on the glass. I hate it that I let things build up until I explode. By 4 a.m., Nakia had slid the scrunchie onto her hair and slid back into her bed. She tried but couldn't go back to sleep. She had a hard time calming herself down when she got mad. The trembling had not gone away either, so she kicked her bedroom wall with the bottom of her foot, leaving a 3.5-inch dent. The stress and depression crowded her brain, and Nakia cried. This next chapter, I'm just going to read a portion of it, really focuses more on Luann. It's okay not to be okay. Luann had read that comment on a social media post and decided to make it her mantra during the pandemic. The devastation started slowly with a couple of people coming into the hospital complaining about fever, chills, shortness of breath, body aches, and fatigue. But by the end of the month, there were more than 5 people a day with those same conditions, and usually 1 or more died. Luann would get so pissed off with people who refuse to wear masks or get the shot to save their lives and save the lives of their family and friends. When the vaccine finally arrived, she and the other hospital staff clapped and whistled and shouted, "Hallelujah." Many people prayed that the horror they had been living would be over soon. The hardest part about being a nurse is when your patient dies. During the earlier part of the pandemic, death became a norm because no one knew how to stop it. The experts like Chief Medical Advisor Anthony Fauci had to make educated guesses because they needed time to figure out what they were dealing with. Fauci did everything he could to guide people toward recovery, including the suggestion to wear masks, staying 6 feet away from others, and finally shutting down schools and businesses. The United States president at the time told folks to drink disinfectant and don't worry about a vaccine because, like a miracle, COVID would disappear quickly. By the time President Joe Biden took office, the shutdown of businesses and schools was necessary to save lives. In April, COVID had reached all 50 states, and the country declared a state of national emergency. Luann quickly grew tired of watching people ignore the CDC's advice, then come to the hospital sick or dying. 4 million COVID cases erupted across Chicago over the 3-year period. There were more than 36,000 deaths, and every patient Luann lost weighed heavily because they were mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers and daughters and sons. So many families lost loved ones that many Chicago healthcare workers were starting to burn out. And it didn't help that African Americans were dying at twice the rate of other groups. During the spring of 2020, newspapers reported that 300 to 350 people died every week in Chicago. The first COVID patient had appeared in January of 2020, and by April, refrigerated trucks were transporting the overflow of dead bodies from the morgue to a surge warehouse. Once experts learned that COVID was spread by contact, families were not allowed to be with their loved ones who were dying in the hospital, and that was very hard for Luann. The hospital staff offered families time with their loved one using technology like iPads and computers, but it fell to the nurses like Luann to sit with patients as they took their last breath. Annabelle Ruby Wilson was one of the patients that Luann sat with for hours before she passed. Ruby was sassy and funny. She told stories about living in Brownsville in the 1950s. It was also called the Black Metropolis in Chicago. Ruby told Luann about the girl group she started with 2 friends. They were called the Rubies. And one of their favorite places to perform was Club DeLisa on the south side of Chicago. Luann enjoyed her stories and often asked Ruby to sing a soulful doo-wop song. Even though the 89-year-old's voice was not as strong as it once had been, she could still hear the melodic tune and the vocal timbre and imagined how powerful her voice was when she was in her prime. Luann was constantly worried about getting COVID, especially since she had Nakia to raise. Yet she continued to do her job the best she could. Her patients needed her, and she wanted to be there for them. She tried not to show her fear, yet as more patients arrived and members of the staff began to get sick, she couldn't help it. One family decided to go ahead with a wedding despite the warnings. 12 of them got COVID and ended up in the hospital. 5 never made it out, including the groom. Right after the groom died, Luann marched into the cafeteria and stuffed herself with pizza and soda. She ate all of the medium pepperoni pizza and drank 3 cans of Diet Coke. She ate until she was stuffed in an effort to suppress the pain of death. Then as soon as she finished, she headed to the bathroom, locked the door, and knelt down in front of the stool. She took several deep breaths before shoving her index finger down her throat. She repeated the act a number of times until most of the pizza came up and her heart hurt. Thank you.
Josh Neufeld is the writer and illustrator of the New York Times bestselling graphic novel A.D. New Orleans After the Deluge. He is the illustrator of the New York Times bestselling graphic nonfiction book, The Influencing Machine, and was awarded a Xeric Foundation grant for his first book, A Few Perfect Hours and Other Stories from Southeast Asia and Central Europe. His many publications include The Journalist Resource, Columbia Journalism Review, The Emancipator, The Nib, and the Boston Globe, to name a few. Josh teaches comics at the School of Visual Arts, Michigan State University, and here at Solstice MFA program. But here's where it gets real. Most recently, Josh has written several stories in the field of graphic medicine, using comics journalism to tell personal stories about health experiences, opening discussions for complex medical topics. His story, Empathy 101, recently featured in the Chicago Sun-Times, addresses how medical schools are using improv comedy, virtual reality, and comics to improve doctor-patient communication. And his story, Vaccinated at the Ball, details Chicago's effort to increase COVID-19 vaccination rates among Black and Latino members of the city's LGBTQ community. This story won the Graphic Medicine International Collectives Award for Excellence in Graphic Medicine.
So you kind of like a doctor.
Philosopher Cornel West said it best in response to Josh's book, AD, New Orleans After the Deluge. And I think his words speak to all of Josh's work. Quote, Neufeld does not make propaganda. He makes art that speaks a political and humanitarian message. Never leave people behind. End quote. We need more writers like Josh Neufeld in the world. Please give him a warm welcome.
Wow, that was such a generous introduction. Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen now. Is that all right? All right. Click exit, blah, blah, blah. Is it working now? Here we go. Yes, I have been doing some work in graphic medicine. I really wasn't even aware that that was what I was doing. I was making comics that dealt with medical issues, and I then learned that graphic medicine is a thing and has been for a while, and I guess I've been doing it. And this piece that I'm going to be sharing with you actually talks about graphic medicine. And I just want to give a big shout out to my editor, Carmen Nobel from Journalist Resource, who is here in the audience with us and so wonderfully commissioned this piece and shepherded me so wisely and wonderfully throughout the making of it. Just a quick background about it. It's my typical comics journalism thing where I interview people and they show up as characters in the story. If they're word balloons, then that's an actual quote from the person from my interviews with them. Otherwise, I sometimes quote them as speakers within the comic and caption boxes, and my voice as the cartoonist is also in there as well. So actually, to help you guys sort of parse who's speaking and what's happening, I so kindly have been offered by my wonderful CGN student Corey Knight to come up and help me read the piece alongside. So thank you, Corey. She's going to come up and play. She's going to play all the other characters except me, so she's actually got the hard work here. But I split the piece up into, I broke it up, these large pages with the individual panels all together into each individual panel, so you kind of get a sense of so you can read the words as well as the pictures. So let's jump right in. This is Empathy 101. How med schools are using improv theater, virtual reality, and comics to help physicians understand their patients. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, healthcare providers are more aware than ever of the issue of health equity. Many healthcare issues are structural, but many also come down to the caregiver-patient relationship. That relationship often evolves around this key question: Which crucial pieces of information did the doctor manage to elicit versus those which were left undisclosed? In other words, does the patient trust the doctor enough to share the whole story? The answer to that question is often at the root of the patient's health.
The U.S. has tremendous health equity.
Dr. Marshall H. Chin studies health equity issues at UChicago Medicine.
This term equity means everyone having a fair opportunity to have the best potential health. Oh, that's the first time I've ever been told I'm not loud enough. This term equity means everyone having a fair opportunity to have the best potential health. But we have a healthcare system set up in such a way that prevents many people from realizing that. When you look at health outcomes for many different kinds of conditions, there are massive inequities where disadvantaged populations do worse. But many of the issues occur on a very individual level between a clinician and a patient.
Yada, yada, yada. In late 2019, Dr. Chin wrote a perspective piece about this issue for JAMA Internal Medicine.
Too often, patients perceive that clinicians have not listened to them or understood their values, views, and preferences.
This is where physician empathy comes into play. In 2001, Dr. Mohammad Reza Hojat of Jefferson University developed the Jefferson Scale of Physician Empathy. As he explained in a 2019 interview with the Philadelphia Inquirer,
in the context of patient care, we define empathy as a personality attribute that involves three concepts. One involves understanding of a patient's experiences, concerns, and suffering. Second is the ability to communicate this understanding. And third, the intention to help.
the Jefferson Scale is now widely used in various academic and practical contexts, including medical research.
Patients from racial, ethnic, sexual, and gender minorities receive particularly poor communication, engendering mistrust.
So here we see a patient saying to a doctor in Chinese, "Doctor, my back hurts," and the doctor's not paying any attention. He's just speaking very technical language, kind of not relating to her at all.
Good listening is especially important for patients who are marginalized.
So how can we strengthen the bonds of empathy and trust between clinicians and patients? Medical school seems like a good place to start. Unfortunately, research shows that empathy towards patients actually declines as students go through med school. And research shows that students who gravitate toward tech-oriented specialties like radiology, pathology, and anesthesiology tend to score lower on the empathy scale. What is your major malfunction? Studies also find that med students with higher levels of student debt tend to be significantly more empathetic with their patients. Health equity has been a core course at UChicago Medicine for more than a decade. The course addresses systemic racism, social privilege, and acknowledging and confronting bias. As in the wider world, however, many students don't feel comfortable talking about these issues.
It's one thing to say, be open, be culturally sensitive, etc., but it's different to put these ideas into action.
So in 2020, Dr. Chin introduced a series of workshops designed to help students hone skills like empathy, active listening, and observation.
There may be about 10% who are resistant for one reason or another. They may be coming from a background where they just may not have had a lot of exposure to this. So it's important to create a safe, courageous space for everyone.
The goals of the workshop are for students to develop key empathy skills: listening, building relationships, recognizing how the patient perceives you. I'm glad you guys laughed at that. One of the core exercises is improvisational theater.
Clinicians need to be nimble in their communication, listening and adapting on the fly. Improv powerfully teaches these principles through fun, active, experimental learning and immediate, unfiltered audience feedback. Improv starts with a suggestion from the audience, the other students.
I got this cake for you. You remembered my birthday. Yes, and other workshops focus on principles of stand-up comedy and an aesthetic method called theater of the oppressed.
In Theater of the Oppressed, in Theater of the Oppressed, audience members replace actors in mid-performance to improvise how they would help the characters experiencing oppression to improve their situations, such as a power imbalance.
As Dr. Chin writes,
respectful, collaborative engagement is critical with patients and among partners in health teams.
so here, just to clarify what's going on here, this patient is having elbow trouble. The doctor thinks that they're having hand trouble, and the PA is like, no, it's elbow trouble.
Listening is key to the whole clinician-patient interaction.
And that's Dr. Chin holding up the article he wrote, Improvisational and Stand-Up Comedy, Graphic Medicine, and Theater of the Oppressed to Teach Advancing Health Equity. Med schools have also begun turning to immersive virtual reality as an empathy-enhancing tool. In 2019, the Zucker School of Medicine and Neufeld Health created a VR module in which faculty and staff assumed the avatar of Michael Sterling, a fictional Black male at 3 different points in his life. At each stage, Michael was subjected to various types of racist encounters. Participants reported that the session enhanced their own empathy for racial minorities. A majority of the more than 100 participants promised that their approach to communication would change. VR has also been used in training students in pediatric dentistry. The results were assessed using the Jefferson Scale, and in caring for older patients and age-related diseases. Another growing technique for fostering empathy is the field of graphic medicine. In recent years, graphic medicine has exploded in popularity with annual conferences, many books and articles, and an annual best of feature in JAMA. These are examples of various types of graphic medicine, graphic novels, nonfiction graphic novels. Like its cousin, narrative medicine, the premise of graphic medicine is that telling medical stories in comics form helps promote education and healing. Hey, who's that? That's me. After all, comics engender a strong sense of empathy for the characters in the stories. The stories have a certain immediacy. It's like that Infinite Cats drawing, right? Ian Williams, a British MD and cartoonist, coined the term graphic medicine in 2007. As Williams notes, the form can be therapeutic for both patients and doctors and caregivers. A book called The Graphic Medicine Manifesto provides a good introduction to the field, and this is Abigail Zuger, MD, writing in the New York Times Book Review.
Medical students are now routinely encouraged to examine the complex emotions elicited by their first immersion in the world of illness. Doing so aloud or in prose works for some, but not for all. And it turns out that sketching a set of comic panels can be a powerful alternative.
A 2016 article in the Journal of American Radiology explored using graphic medicine as a teaching tool for invoking empathy from both the physician and the patient during a clinical encounter. So this is the article, Difficult Doctors, Difficult Patients, Building Empathy. It featured a comic with dual narratives, one from the POV of the medical staff and one from that of the patient during a common radiological procedure. So here you can see that there's two narratives going parallel to each other going down the page. So on the left-hand side is like the POV of the doctor, and on the right-hand side is the POV of the patient. And as they're each going through the same moments, they're interpreting all these situations in very different ways. I'm sure you all have had similar experiences. The purpose was to portray micro encounters that have the potential for conflict and represent opportunities for effective communication. The authors call it a co-learning experience. The NYU Grossman School of Medicine features a 6-week graphic medicine seminar taught by artist-in-residence Creota Wilberg, a published cartoonist with a clinical background in massage therapy.
Graphic medicine can be used as processing, stress reduction, and even art therapy.
Participants, students, faculty, and staff read and discuss how bioethical issues are represented in graphic medicine, and they draw their own comics.
The first class is drawing signs and symptoms, visual signs, swelling, bleeding, or something else. Symptoms are subjective: pain, dizziness, cognitive issues, or anxiety, or a migraine, things that the patient has to report that the doctor has no way of measuring.
Students create organ mascots.
In medical situations, there aren't that many people with an active sense of humor, but I use humor as a coping mechanism, and other people do too.
Other assignments include drawing autobiographical strips.
As the workshop progresses, the students start to reveal more personal stories. These autobiographical comics start to become more and more revelatory.
Her workshop welcomes discussions of equity.
I've received comics from students of color who have experienced different racial encounters as patients that can be very revealing.
One of Wilberg's main goals is to have her students
make comics that help people realize that their health care providers are real people.
Wilberg has taught similar workshops in a variety of different med schools all over the world. A number of med schools have integrated graphic medicine courses into their curricula. One example is Dr. Michael J. Green's course at Penn State Health Milton S. Hershey Medical Center. In a similar vein, Dr. Michael Natter, an endocrinologist at NYU Langone, uses his art background to make comics and illustrations that explain difficult to understand medical concepts to his patients, as well as to tell truths about the stresses of life as a doctor. Dr. Green discussed his graphic medicine course in a 2015 academic medicine article.
Course assessments indicate that students believe creating a comic can significantly improve a variety of doctoring skills and attitudes, including empathy, communication, attention to nonverbal cues, and awareness of physician bias.
Here's a couple of the student comments from that article.
This class opened up a whole new way to express myself. I think it helped me understand the patient experience better than any readings ever have.
Dr. Chin of UChicago Medicine is a proponent of graphic medicine as well. It goes back to his ethos that
listening is key to the whole clinician-patient interaction.
The graphic medicine exercise that Dr. Chin uses goes like this.
Do a self-portrait and then start building it out. Put in some objects that are important to you. Put yourself in an environment that's important to you. It helps people realize that, yeah, they're individuals, but then they're part of this wider web of relationships and places and context. And this is something that's pushed in patient care. It's not just a patient as an individual, but they're embedded within a certain neighborhood, socioeconomic context, and geography.
The end.
Wow. Okay. This has been an awesome first night of readings here at Solstice. Thank you, Josh Neufeld and Venise Berry. There you are. And Ellen Austin Lee, can we have one more round of applause?